So here we go. We're going to go ahead and start with calculating payments. Okay, it's going to start easier and it's going to get harder. Calculating payments. Now, the first one I'm going to show you how to do is how to calculate what's called the interest-only payment. Calculating the interest-only payment. You simply take the loan amount and you multiply it by the note rate. Remember, note rate means interest rate, nominal rate. There's three different ways that they can say it. But you're simply taking the loan amount, multiplying it by the rate, press equal. That's going to tell you the annual interest. If you want to know it for 5 years, then multiply it by 5. If you want to know it, multiply it by, I will say 60. Multiply by 5 for 5 years. If you want to know what it is quarterly, divide it by 4. But you have to start with figuring out what is it a year. To figure out the yearly interest, the annual interest, the loan amount times the rate, press equal. And that's simply going to tell you how much the interest is for a year. Oftentimes they'll say, and what is it going to be for 30 years? Then multiply by 30. Or what is it going to be for 5 years? Then multiply by 5. What is it going to be for half a year? Then divide it by 6. You get it? But you have to start with what is it a year? And that will be the loan amount times the rate, press equal. Here's your first problem. You're going to do the problem and I'll let you know when I'm ready for the answer. On a loan amount of $110,000 with an interest rate of 5.25%, what is the amount of interest that the borrower will pay in a year? Take a few minutes, figure it out, and I'll let you know what the answer is. On a loan amount of $110,000 with an interest rate of 5.25%, what is the loan amount? What is the amount of interest that the borrower will pay in a year? Anyone got it? A. You're simply going to take $110,000 times 5.25, press the percent sign, and read what it says. Okay? 110 times 5.25, the percent sign, equal, read what it says. The annual interest in this case is $5,775. My next question says, for the same thing, what is it a month? What do? You just simply divide it by 12. Divide it by 12, and what would the answer be? B. It's the easiest one you're going to get today. Okay, so make sure you got that. Anyone don't have that, let me know now, because it's going to get progressively harder. Calculating the annual interest rate. Another thing that you want to watch out for, and I didn't tell you in the tips, but some of the math problems, or most of them, they're always going to give you way more information than you need. And you're going to have to read in the problem to figure out what part of this you need and what part you don't. So that's another tip. Understanding, reading the math problem to figure out what is it you need. They're always going to give you way more information than what you need. But look at what they're asking you and only answer what they're asking you. Here's another one. When the loan amount is multiplied by the note rate, what is that called? The loan amount multiplied by the note rate. What did you just calculate? The annual interest charge. If it would have said divided by 12, then it would have been the monthly interest charge. Some of the math problems aren't even math on the test. This would be considered a math problem on the test. And there's no calculations involved at all, but it's considered a math problem. Now, calculating PMI. I didn't say MIP, calculating PMI. You're going to take the loan amount times the PMI factor, they'll always give it to you, and just press equal. And that's going to tell you the annual PMI. The loan amount times whatever the PMI factor is, they'll have to give that to you, and that will tell you the annual. If you want to know what the monthly is, divide it by 12. If you want to know how much PMI they're going to pay in 2 years, multiply it by 2. But you have to start with the base formula. So here is your question. If $90,000 is the loan amount on a $110,000 home with Fannie and Freddie with a PMI coverage of 0.62%, what is the monthly PMI coverage? They're asking for the monthly. Take a few minutes, figure it out, and then I'll let you know if you're right or wrong. When you think you have it, let me know. B. You're going to take $90,000, they're trying to see if you know to use the 90, not the 100, because it's based on the loan amount, okay? The $90,000 times 0.62%. Key exactly that in your calculator and press equal, and then divide it by 12. You're going to take $90,000 times 0.62, press the percent sign, divide it by 12, and that would tell you the monthly PMI amount, and you should have gotten $46.50. Everybody good so far? All right. That's calculating PMI. Whether it's PMI or MIP, they're always going to give you the factor. You just need to know what to do with the factor. Take the loan amount, divide it by whatever the factor is. That's going to tell you a year. If they want to know it a month, divide it by 12. Now, in calculating income, things you just have to remember. Hourly wage, remember there's 52 weeks in a year. No shortcuts, 52 weeks in a year. Biweekly and bi-monthly are not the same thing. Biweekly, there's 26 pay periods. Bi-monthly, there's 24 pay periods. They're not going to remind you about this on the test. These are things you're supposed to already know. Okay, so here we go. A borrower who is paid $14.50 an hour, works 30 hours a week. How much do they receive a month? Take a few minutes, figure it out, and tell me how much would they receive a month. A borrower who is paid $14.50 an hour, works 30 hours a week. How much do they get a month? Anybody? A, B, C, D?
C.
B. B. Some of the things with the math problem is you're not reading. It said 30 hours a week. Most people assume that it's 40. But you have to read. The biggest thing that most people do wrong with the math problem is they're not reading. They're just thinking they already know what it's going to say. You would just take $14.50 times 30 times 52 divided by 12. Okay? Divided by 12. $14.50 times 30 times 52 divided by 12. And it would give you B, $1,885. In the problems, if you calculate the income wrong, all the rest of the problem is going to be wrong. And what's going to happen is in a lot of problems, you have to calculate the income before you can do the real problem. And you'll see what I mean shortly. But this next one is on biweekly. A borrower receives a biweekly fixed salary of $1,000 a month. How much is the underwriter going to count toward the loan? If they receive $1,000 and is biweekly, how much are they going to count? What did you come by? What did you come with? Biweekly. It would be D. 1,000 times 26, because there's 26 biweekly pay periods, divided by 12. Make sure you understand, again, the difference between biweekly and bi-monthly. If it was bi-monthly, it would have been 24, but it's not bi-monthly. It's biweekly. $1,000 times 26 divided by 12. Because there's 26 bi-weekly pay periods in a year. Remember, we just talked about that, the difference between bi-weekly and bi-monthly. Again, some of the math problems are just wrong because people aren't reading. People aren't reading. It said bi-weekly. It didn't say bi-monthly. How many bi-weekly pay periods are in a year?
26.
How many bi-monthly pay periods are in a year?
24.
Every other week means bi-weekly. Twice a month means bi-monthly. So it's just reading and understanding what it exactly is that they're asking. Now, down payment. Whenever they ask you to calculate the minimum investment, what does that mean? That means calculate the down payment. So they may not say the word down payment. They'll say calculate the minimum investment. And you'll be like, well, what is that? Minimum investment just means calculate the down payment. Okay? They're just using words to try to confuse you. You need to remember a few things because they're not going to remind you. If it's FHA, you're supposed to already know that that's 3.5% down. They're not going to say calculate the FHA down payment at 3.5%. You're supposed to already know, oh, that's FHA, so it's 3.5%. They're not going to remind you about that. VA loans and USDA loans, which we'll get into later, for the purposes of the test, no down payment. I'm going to show you later when a VA loan would have a down payment, but for the purposes of the math on the test, VA loans do not have a down payment. So here we go. If a property has a sales price of $187 and an appraised value of $190, and they're getting a conventional conforming loan with a down payment of 5%, how much will the down payment be? If a property has a sales price of $187, an appraised value of $190, they're getting a conventional conforming loan with a down payment of 5%. How much would the down payment be? Anybody? $9,300. Calculating LTV. LTV is loan to value. Calculating LTV. LTV is just the first loan amount. They may call it the first trust deed, the first mortgage, but it's just calculating the first loan amount divided by whatever is lower, the sales price or the appraised value, and just press equal and read what it says. I see people, and then they're still doing this, and they're still doing that. I'm like, what are they doing? Just take the first loan amount divided by whatever is lower, the sales price or the appraised value, press equal, read what it says. Simple as that. Okay? The CLTV, combined loan to value, take the first and the second, divided by whatever is lower between the sales price and the appraised value, just press equal, read what it says. LTV, CLTV. LTV is just the first loan amount divided by whatever is lower, sales price or the appraised value, just press equal. CLTV is the first loan amount and the second loan amount divided by whatever is lower, and just press equal. So here we go. If you have a home with an appraised value of $120, the sales price of $125, the loan amount on the first trust deed is $90, the loan amount on the second trust deed is $10,000. You need to calculate the LTV and the CLTV. So I just gave you the formula. So you have a home that has appraised at $120. The sales price, it has appraised value of $120, a sales price of $125. The loan amount on the first trust deed is $90. The loan amount on the second trust deed is $10. Take a few minutes and calculate the LTV. So what do you think the LTV is? 75. And the CLTV? 83. To calculate the LTV, you'd have taken $90,000 divided by whatever is lower, which is $120, press equal, that's 75%. For the CLTV, you'd have taken the first and the second, so the 90 and the 10, divided by whatever is lower, just press equal, it would have said 83%. Write this down if you didn't get it, because you will have to know how to calculate LTV and CLTV. Now they may ask you, because remember all the math problems aren't actually math, it could be questions. They may ask you to give them the formula for calculating LTV and CLTV, so make sure you know those as well. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk about is calculating what's called acquisition cost. Calculating what's called acquisition cost. And every single class, every week, half the class get it right, the other half gets it wrong. Every week for the last 4 or 5 years. So let's see how you guys do. Acquisition cost is the total amount needed to purchase the property, including down payment, loan amount, closing costs, everything. Acquisition cost is the total amount needed to purchase the property. Here is your problem. Assume that the sales price is $187. The loan amount is $142,100. The closing costs are $5,500. The rate is 6.25%. What is the acquisition cost? I'm going to read that again. Assume the sales price is $187. The loan amount, $142,100. The closing cost, $5,500. The rate, 6.25%. Calculate the acquisition cost. Think about it. Go back, read the definition, and calculate the acquisition cost. The acquisition cost. How much is it going to cost for me to acquire this property? The answer is $192,500. Well, they're selling it for $187, and I'm going to need $5,500 in closing costs. So in order for me to acquire this property, where there's loans, down payment, gifts, doesn't matter, I'm going to need to come up with $192,500. That's what they mean when they say calculate the acquisition cost. You got to think like they do. Remember, I told you they're always going to give you more in the problem than you need. That 6.25%, not needed. You know, some of the things are not needed. Write this down. Acquisition cost. How much is it going to cost for me to acquire the property? Not how much I need to come in with at closing. Not how much my down payment will be. How much is it going to cost to acquire the property? Well, they're selling it for $187. The closing costs are $5,500. The acquisition cost is $192,500. Regardless of how I come up with it. This is what they mean when they say acquisition cost. Any questions on this? Okay, kind of throws everyone off. Yeah. But you have to know what they mean when they say acquisition cost. Okay, so here's another one on acquisition cost. And remember, I'm not there with you, so you can't ask me any questions. So what would you do? What would you do if this was the situation? And let me tell you when I'm ready for the answer. Assume the sales price is $195. The loan amount is $155,100. The closing costs are $4,500, including 2 discount points to buy down the rate to the permanent rate of 6.25%. What is the acquisition cost? What is the acquisition cost? Take a few minutes, read through it. I'll let you know when I'm ready for the answer, and we'll see if you're right or wrong. Remember, I'm not there, so you can't ask me anything. What would you do? What would you do? What do you guys think? Acquisition costs, $199,500. It says including. Make sure you pay attention to where it says including or excluding the discount points. It said including, meaning it's already there. So you don't need to calculate the discount points. It said including. If it would have said excluding, that 2-0, whatever you guys are coming up with, would have been the answer. Got it? So again, a lot of the math problem is just reading it right. What is it that they're really, really asking me? Okay? So if you didn't get this, write this down. So when you're trying to study this later, you'll know how we came up with it. Take a few minutes, write it down. 195 plus 4,500, 199,500. The discount points, they've already taken those into consideration. It says including. Pay attention to including and excluding. Remember, they're trying to trick you. If they trick you enough, you get to give them another $110, right? Who wants to do that? Go ahead.
On the 2 points, is that 2 points on just the sell amount?
It would have been based on the loan amount, because you're going to learn later that points are based on the loan amount. In this instance, we didn't have to calculate them at all because it said including. But if we had to calculate them, points are based on the loan amount, and we're going to be getting to that in a minute. Loan amount, okay? Good question. All right, my next one. Ratios. Calculating ratios. Front end, back end, top, bottom, however they want to call them. Calculating ratios. They're going to say calculate the her. And you're going to be like, well, who is she? The her. That's what they call the front end ratio. You need to know that term. Housing expense ratio. We call it here in California the front end DTI, or the top ratio. They will refer to it on the test as the her. Calculate the her. the housing expense ratio. And it's simply taking the mortgage payment, the PITI, dividing it by the gross, and press equal. The mortgage payment, the PITI, dividing it by the gross, and press equal. And just read what it says. Just read what it says. The back end, we call it the bottom ratio, or the back end DTI. They call it the TOR, total obligation ratio. The TOR, total obligation ratio. That's simply taking the PITI divided by the debt, all the debt that will show up on their credit report, and press equal. And press equal. So the front end is the house note divided by the gross. The back end is the house note plus their debt, any debt that will show up on their credit report, divided by the gross. Now, important things to remember when calculating the back end. You're only going to count things that will show up on their credit report. Okay? So it wouldn't be things like soccer practice dues or the light bill. That doesn't come on your credit report. Okay? And they'll try to trick you by throwing those into scenarios. It's debt that will show up on the credit report. The other thing you need to remember is if the debt has 10 payments or less, like a credit card and they only have 6 payments left on it, or a auto loan but they only have 4 payments left on it. If the debt has 10 payments or less on it, you don't count it. It's like you didn't see it. There's only one exception. If it's a lease. If it's a lease, it can have 1 payment or 100 payments. You have to count it each and every time. So again, read it. Did it say auto loan with 7 payments left? You count it. Did it say auto lease with 7 payments left? You still have to count it. Leases you have to count regardless, because they're assuming that the people are going to renew the lease. So they'll give you a problem and they'll say they have an auto lease with only 2 payments left on it. And you're thinking, oh, 2 payments, we're not going to count that. It said lease. You're going to count it regardless. Got that? Otherwise, if it's 10 or less, you wouldn't count it. But pay attention to loan versus lease when they're dealing with autos. Here's your problem. Smith's annual income is $60,000. Their expected PITI, or their house note, is $1,550. Their debt is $450. Find the borrower's front end and back end ratio. What is the borrower's front end and back end ratio? Take a few minutes, figure it out. I'll let you know when I'm ready for the answer. What's the front end? 31%. What's the back end? 40%. Here's how you do that. You had to first calculate their income. They gave it to you annually, so you had to figure out what it was monthly. Remember, if the income is wrong, everything else is going to be wrong. Then you're going to take the house note divided by the gross income. $1,550 divided by $5,000 equals 31%. For the back end, $1,550 plus $450, which comes out to $2,000, divided by the income, $5,000. Just press equal, 40%. Write this down so that you can know how to follow it when you go back home. The top and the bottom, the front end and the back end, the her and the tor. Calculating ratios. So here's another one. John's annual income is $45,000. His wife's monthly income is $4,500. Their house note is $1,750. Their debt is $850. So this time I have 3 things that I want you to compute. Number 1, I want to know what their total household income is. Number 2, their front end. And number 3, their back end. What do you need to know if you're calculating the ratios? You're supposed to already know the answer to that question. So figure out their household income, their front end, and their back end. I'll let you know when I'm ready for the answer. So what's their household income? Because if that's wrong, everything else is wrong. 8250. 8250. They gave you his annually, so you had to divide it by 12. They gave you hers already monthly, so you just added to his 8,250. Now that you have that information, you can go on to the next part of calculating the ratios. What's the front end? 21. 1750 divided by the 8250. What's the back end? 31. 32 is actually because it will round up. That's another reason why they have you use their calculators. They're already set to round up to what it needs to be. 1750 plus the 850 divided by the income, which is the 8,250. Go ahead and take a few minutes and write this down in your workbook so that you can follow along with it later. Again, some of the math problems aren't even really math. Just like this next question that I'm going to ask you, you would need to be able to know what the answer is to that. Some of you guys still writing down? Are you good? So this one says when PITI is divided by gross monthly income, what is that called? PITI divided by their gross. It didn't say PITI plus their debt. Just the PITI divided by their income. What would that be? D. Housing expense ratio, or they could have put front ratio there, or they could have put top ratio there. That's how they come up with so many questions. Or they could have just put HER, H-E-R. You're supposed to know what that means. Now, there's going to be some problems that if you haven't memorized the ratios, you're not going to even be able to do the problems. So you have to memorize the ratios. So on this chart, put an X, put a star. You have to know these. Again, there's going to be some problems. If you don't know what the FHA ratios are, you're not going to be able to do the problem. If you don't know what the conventional ratios are, you're not going to be able to do the problem. And also, no sense in arguing with me about the ratios. I have people that says, but I've seen an FHA loan where the ratios were this. Or I've seen, if you want to pass this test, the ratios that you have to use are the ones that I have here on this chart. Okay? Of course, there's other things done out there in the world. But for the exam, the generic, the ratios for conventional, 28/36. For the exam, the ratios for FHA, 31/43. That's what you have to memorize. And again, there's going to be some problems. If you don't know what these ratios are, you wouldn't be able to do them in the first place. And that's what I'm getting ready to show you now. The problems that you have to have memorized the ratios for them. Because if you haven't, you're not going to be able to do this. Okay? So, calculating what's called maximum mortgage payment. The reason why people get this one wrong, and I was just talking to one of you guys about this this morning, is because people don't want to follow instructions. There's 3 steps, and they're always trying to figure out another way to do it. But I promise you, if you just do step 1, step 2, and step 3 each and every time, you'll always get it right. My husband and I argue about this all the time. He will say, well, you can also do this, and you can also do that. You can probably do a lot of things. There's a lot of different ways you can get to my house. But if you go this way that I'm showing you, you'll get there every single time. Again, these are the 3 steps to calculating what's called maximum mortgage payment. Step number 1, and you have to do them all. If you want to know for sure that you're right, you need to do them all. Step number 1 is take the gross times the front ratio. In the problem, they're going to say it's FHA or if it's conventional. If you don't know what the FHA ratios are, what are you going to do? You can't do it. Step number 1 says take the gross times the front ratio, press equal. Write that down. Step 2 says take the gross times the back ratio minus the debt, press equal. Write that down. Step number 3 says look at both of those. Whichever one is the lowest, that's the answer to your problem. You have to do them all. Because when you try to do them on the test, A, B, C, D, it's going to have all of them there. Well, how do you know which one is the answer to the problem? The one that's the lowest of the 2. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1 is take the gross times the front ratio, press equal. Step 2, take the gross times the back ratio minus the debt, press equal. Step 3 says look at them both and tell me which one is the lowest. That's going to be the answer to the problem. This is what they're going to look like on your exam. Okay, so here we go. Calculating the maximum mortgage payment. A borrower earns $15.75 an hour. They work 40 hours a week. He wants to be pre-qualified for an FHA loan financing with a PITI payment of no more than what he's currently paying for rent, which is $1,000 a month. He has a truck payment of $250, a credit card payment of $25 a month. He intends to obtain a loan from his 401k for the 3.5% down. Wow, a lot of information. What is the maximum mortgage payment that he'd qualify for? Read back through it again. Figure out what information you need, what information you don't need. I just want to know what is the maximum mortgage payment that he'd qualify for a conventional loan. Take a few minutes. Whatever the problem said. Okay? So, take a few minutes, read through it again, and calculate the maximum mortgage payment that this borrower would qualify for. So, again, make sure you calculate the income correct, because if the income is wrong, everything else is wrong. Also, remember certain things, if they don't show up on the credit report, you're not going to use them, okay? You would have done the income, and then the income would have been $2,730. Now that you have the income times the front ratio, which is 31%, equals 846. Step 1, take the income times the front ratio for FHA, which is 31%, it would have been 846.30. Then for the back ratio, the income times the back ratio minus the debt, just press equal. So the 2,330 times 43% minus the auto loan minus the $25 credit card payment, you would have gotten $898.90. Step number 3, look at them both. Which one is the lowest of the two? That's the answer to the problem. All the rest of the stuff they put in that problem was just to throw you off. If you didn't get this, or even if you did, write this down, so when you try to do this again later, you'll be able to figure it out. The formula. If you memorize the formula, then you can do it. Now the next one we're going to do, that's why I want to make sure that you got this one right. The next one you're going to do, when you get the answer, raise your hand. I'm going to come check it. If it's right, you get to take a break. If it's wrong, we need to stay here and figure out what the heck is going on. But there's 3 steps. Step number 1, the gross times the front ratio. Press equal. Step number 2, the gross times the back ratio minus the debt. Press equal. Step number 3, look at them both. Whatever is the lowest of the two is the answer to the problem. So here we go. 2 months ago, Lisa Zorn was honorably discharged from the Air Force, where she spent 4 years training as an airplane mechanic. After discharge, she moved to take a 40-hour-a-week apprenticeship mechanic job with a major airline where she earns $18 an hour. Last month, her husband Dave, who works for the past 2 years as a registered nurse, found a job nursing, and he makes $625 a week. What is the maximum mortgage payment that the lender will allow on a conventional loan? Take a few minutes, read through the whole thing again, and calculate the maximum mortgage payment for conventional. There you go. So, you would have had to calculate the income. Calculate the income, guys. So look up here. Remember, if the income is wrong, everything else is wrong. The income should have came to $5,823.33. If the income is wrong, everything would have been wrong. Then once you did the income, you would have done step 1 times 28%. It said conventional. That would have given you $1,631.93. Step 2, the back ratio, 2098. The answer would have been the income times 36%. Look at both of those. What's the answer to step 1? What's the answer to step 2? Whichever one is the lowest is the answer to the problem. So the answer to the problem would have been 1631.93. 1631.93. Step 1, step 2, step 3.